So, welcome everyone to 52 Living Ideas. My name is Evanique, and I am joined with Brian and Penny. Hi, Penny. And this is our series on the Divine Feminine. Tonight, we are going to be covering uh, the Virgin Mary in all aspects, based off mostly off the chapter by Isabella Price. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set it up and then we can get started. So, just give me a minute and I'm going to share my screen. All right. All right. Can everybody see that one? Thank you. So, tonight we're covering the Virgin Mary, the Return of the Goddess. Like I said before, this is based off the book. This is based off the Isabella Price book. Um, so just going to jump in. So first, I want to talk about the question mark of Return of the Goddess, and we're going to see throughout the presentation why this is a question mark. Sorry, trying to do double duty here. So just going to start. So sections of this presentation. First, we're going to start with preliminary remarks. Going to talk a little bit about the benefits obtained from the Divine Feminine series. We're going to do the review of the masculine and feminine energy, just really quick, really briefly. We're also going to talk about the role of myth in this whole series of the Divine Feminine and the importance of it. And then we're going to jump into the Virgin Mary in both Christian and non-Christian traditions. We're going to talk about her being the mother of Jesus, the virgin birth, the Assumption, the Queen of Heaven, and the Black Virgin. And I'm going to stop in the middle of the presentation and allow people to ask questions throughout the presentation. Sorry, I just have to check. All right. Sorry, guys, I just have to kind of do both checking people in and, so excuse me if there's a pause. So I want to start with the preliminary remarks. The benefit of this series. In this particular meetup, we're going to be learning about the myth of the Virgin Mary. But throughout the series, the Divine Feminine series, we want to identify traditions or aspects of the Divine Feminine that you would like to understand better further with reading and discussion. And that includes tonight. I'm going to go through several stories of Mary briefly, but if there's something that you want to know more about, please let me know. If I don't have the answer offhand, I will research it. Maybe we'll do another series on Mary. But one thing I want to do is not rush this. The one thing I want to do is not rush this. So I'm not in a hurry to get through the series. So if you guys are hesitant about asking a question because you think, oh, I need to just get through it, don't. We can always slow down. We can always go back. Like I said, I'm going to stop at some point and allow people to ask questions. And then once we do that, then we're going to understand the significance of also we want to, in this series, understand the significance of the Divine Feminine from a contemporary religious and spiritual, sorry, I can't read tonight. We want to understand the significance of the Divine Feminine in both a contemporary religious aspect and a spiritual aspect, and both in the Divine Feminine's presence and absence. The goddess is the precursor and the missing element, which we're going to see. For myself, when I was doing the research on this theory on the Virgin Mary, I did not know how many goddesses, how much her story was taken from pre-Christian goddesses until I started studying the Divine Feminine. And so it was just very interesting to me and the link between that. So now I just want to just remind us ourselves about the divine masculine and the divine feminine. We did this on the very first meetup when presenting about the divine masculine and feminine and just talking about that. So I just wanted to go over the qualities because I think it's important because again, this is not male and female, this is not gendered. These are different types of energies. And the important thing to note is that they are in each of us in some way, shape, or form. And some people, the divine feminine is dominant, and some people, the divine masculine is dominant. And one thing I want to just bring throughout the series is that both of these energies are very valuable. They are essential to life. They were created. Um, and they are integral into continuing life on earth and like going through day-to-day life. So for the divine masculine, there's logic, cognition, spirit, singular focus, structure, and action. In the divine feminine, it's intuition, emotion, body, wide focus, fluidity, and rest. And all of these things are needed in some way, form, of another, depending on the task. And certain tasks, the divine feminine comes out more like, child care and, um, and for example, in masculine world, it's like planning and getting things done, but both are needed. And like I said before, it's not a gender thing because there's so many men that are great at taking care of their children and knowing what they need. And there's women that are great in business and, being more logical, who maybe are not the mothering type, so to speak. So just wanted to just bring that out. And then we're going to go over myth. We did go over this again in the first session, and I just wanted to bring it back because one thing I just wanted to be remembered in this series is that myths, or also known as stories, are ways of telling people about or I would say teaching lessons. So when we talk about myth, we talked about the eye being the instrument of perception. So like a great story, creates a visual for the person that's hearing it. The person can see, like, I mean, not like directly see, obviously, but you can see colors, you can see, you can see like the castle being built. The classic example I have is always Harry Potter. I know that sounds weird in the Divine Feminine meetup, but we have in the Divine Feminine meetup, I'm sorry, we have in Harry Potter, when J.K. Rowling does the descriptions, you can see Hogwarts, or at least I can. I can see Hogwarts. I can see what's going on. And this was before even a movie came out about Harry Potter. Like that was the beauty of it. Like you can make it up in your own mind and you can really put yourself in that world. And then there's a window where you can actually just see through the story. Um, you can see through the story to get the lesson or the impact on you and the impact on your life. And people get different things from different stories based off their experience, based off their perception. They bring your own experience to the story. And then there's the mirror, how you ultimately see yourself in this story. So just wanted to kind of go over that a little bit as well. Now I'm going to move on. And we're going to talk about the mother of Jesus. But before we do that, does anybody have any questions or comments? If you do, you can type exclamation point in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. And I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute. I'll give it 30 seconds and then I'll start. Oh, Brian, hold on. Let me unmute everybody.
Hello?
You got it? Yep.
Okay, wow, I'm really glad you went back with the reminders on the masculine and feminine and the role of the myth. We kind of, I myself had lost touch with that a bit. The one thing that I've gone over several times in this, and I also like the point you made that these are energies, not genders. I've gone over my mind several times these masculine and feminine characteristics over the past, since we've been working in this area, is this a complete list? I mean, if you put the masculine and feminine together, do you get a complete whole, or is there anything missing? And maybe that's a silly question, but that's what I keep coming back to. And partly because I think it's kind of an archaic thinking, the masculine and feminine, although it's, it's very helpful, but we tend to think of things in those terms. Like in economics today, we don't think of Mr. Supply meeting up with Mrs. Demand and giving birth to products and services. But, thinking in those terms is can be, very helpful. And I guess the answer I came up with in thinking about this is the masculine and feminine taken together complete. I guess the answer is yes, it has, it has proven to be complete over the life, the span of humanity, because we are masculine, feminine, and anything that is human has arisen either out of either one of these energies. Everything that's arisen is arisen out of these energies, and over time, some have proven to be masculine, more masculine, and some more feminine. So I think, yeah, it is a, this particular list might not be complete, but it is a, you put the masculine and feminine together, I think it does give a complete picture of humanity, and certainly can do that. And so that's one of the powers of this, of the divine feminine, and looking at that, it really helps to give a complete picture.
Yeah.
The other thing is the role of the myth. Just a thought, kind of a preliminary thought on this chapter. I was reading this chapter, and one thing that struck me in this presentation is that it's taking a given the period in history when when Christianity arose. I think there was something, this was no longer the axial period, as after the axial period, philosophy and thinking in terms of non-personified generalizations was already, I think, well accepted. And asking questions about interrogating history and nature was accepted kind of in a philosophical way, or what we might call a scientific way, was more accepted when Jesus and Mary and this story arose. One definition of myth that I've run across, and I think as I've read several myths, I think it's a good one. A myth is a story where you do not question the facts. Different people can draw different conclusions out of those facts. That's true. Adam and Eve, for example, is a very powerful myth, because there's so many conclusions people have drawn from it in so many different ways, but nobody questions the facts. Was God walking in the garden? Yeah, that's what the myth said. And did they cover themselves with fig leaves? Yeah, that's what the myth says. Nobody tries to look back and see. And and even if it's not true that it didn't happen historically, well, that's the story, that's the myth, and you just accept it for what it's worth, if you will. And what I see going on in this chapter, talking about, Isabella Price goes off on the birth of Mary and her genealogy and the death of Mary. That's because, in my opinion, at the time when these events occurred and the story of Mary arose and people were trying to understand her, the mythical was no longer adequate, and people were questioning the story of Mary. They weren't accepting it as adequate, as fact. The facts that were given were not adequate. They weren't necessarily complete. So there were questions. Questions kept coming up, and you see this in all this quote, in the theology, which is more of a philosophical approach to religion. And a lot of what's in this chapter, I would say, is an attempt to answer questions that are raised by the Mary story is set forth in the New Testament, because when the New Testament was written, it was not accepted as a myth. It was presented as history, and so was subject to further examination. And that's a lot. I think that's a lot of what's going on in this chapter. So those are my preliminary comments there.
Yeah. Now I was just going to totally agree with you on that. I think you're right. This chapter does answer some of those questions. And, I remember Jordan Peterson saying when he was talking about his Bible series, is that, one of the reasons why the Bible has lasted so long is because it's stories and people remember stories. Historical facts, some people may remember and some people may not, but stories leave something with you as the person, whether they're factually true or not. They do leave you with something, and it has an emotional impact, which makes you remember it even more. And I think you're right. I think, the Bible in the New Testament was presented as fact, right? And so because it was presented as fact, it off like, when they created, I shouldn't say created, but they assembled the books of the Bible together and made it the Bible at the I think it was at the Council of Nicene. Um, they presented it as this is fact. And so when you do that, you subject yourself to, you know, to criticism, to doubt, and things to prove that it's fact. Whereas I think if you looked at the Bible as stories, and yes, some things in history did happen. If you dig through archaeological, if you go through archaeological digs, some of the buildings they talk about did exist. But if you looked at them as stories and you think about it, it's kind of like oral tradition, right? Especially in the beginning of the Bible. If you look at those as stories and not like and again, the people that created the Bible presented it as pure fact and truth. And so it puts itself up for criticisms. But if you look at it as a story and a myth, and you just take what there is to take from it, then you just go for there. So I totally agree. And I think Isabella Price approaches it that way. I also think too, that Isabella Price wants to show how, there's the pre-Christian goddesses had their influence on some of the stories that were outside of the Bible. Because most of the stories from Mary actually come from outside of the New Testament. And we're going to go through that through the presentation, but they're not in the Bible itself. It's outside of the Bible, which is why some people in the church, I think, kind of like want to, some churches, I should say, some Christian churches accepted this and some Christian churches did not. So we're going to talk about that. If anybody else has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Otherwise, I will continue on with the presentation. So I'll give it another 30 seconds as things crash down. Sorry. All right, so I'm gonna go share my screen again. Can everybody see my screen?
Yeah.
The
Okay.
black version.
Yeah, that's at the end. All right, so we're gonna. All right, it's not doing that. Okay, so we're just gonna go with it Sorry, technical difficulties. So now we're going to talk about, jump into the story of Mary and being the mother of Jesus. Um, so this mostly comes from the New Testament. And actually, like I said before, in the New Testament, there isn't a lot about Mary. Um, it's the most significant one in the New Testament, and it is the basis for all of the other stories of Mary. This is the common theme that she is the mother of Jesus. Um, we know the basics about her is that she was a human woman who found favor with God. Um, you know, it was, announced as an angel announced that, Mary was going to give birth to Jesus. And oh, I'm sorry, I do have a question. Oh, sorry. Um, so he's a human. I'm sorry, let me start over. She's a human woman who found favor with God. An angel, I think it was Gabriel, announced to her that she was going to give birth to a son. She accepts that and she gives birth to Jesus. So that's the beginning of the story. Towards the middle of the New Testament, Mary appears again at the wedding of Cana when she partners with Jesus in the mysterious unfolding of his divinity. And that's, the story of Cana is, at the wedding, she, as the host once runs out of wine. Mary asks Jesus to help out. Jesus says, it's not my time. But Mary's like, do what he says. Typical mother, right? Of course, she knows her son is going to listen to her and do it. And so he turns the water into wine, and that is the first miracle. And so Mary in the New Testament is a partner to that. In the New Testament, there's really nothing about Mary's birth. Um, it's very little about her life with Joseph. And, when we see her, the other significant part in the New Testament is that she's at the foot of the cross. She's right there with her son as he dies. And that's significant because, to be at where she was at a crucifixion in Rome could have gotten her put on the cross as well. So for her to be there along with Mary Magdalene, and there was another woman, and the disciple John, that was a big risk for her to do that and to be there with her son. And it just shows the love that she has as a mother. And so, the New Testament, predictably, has her as the mother of Jesus, which is the basis of all of her other stories about Mary. So we're going to move on. Oh, it's not working. Okay. So where do the other stories come from, right? So the other stories actually come from pseudo-piographical scriptures. And what they are, in short, is they are stories that are attributed to a certain person that we now have learned may have not authored them. One of the most notable ones that describes Mary is the book of James. And James is purported to be Jesus's brother. Now, it is known that James actually did not write that book of James, but it is attributed to him. There's other stories in the New Testament. They were saying certain stories that are attributed to Paul. Paul did not actually write certain letters that were written by his students as he was in prison. So, so those are the type of stories that we're talking about. And they're significant because they go more into Mary's life. So does anybody have any questions before I move on? If you do, you can type exclamation point in chat.
I do have a comment.
Please.
I think this really, I said earlier that a myth is where you don't question the facts, but on the other hand, I think myths evolve from an ongoing questioning of the existing stories and elaboration of the stories. For example, I can imagine in the Iliad, they would say, well, if Achilles did kill Hector, then this or that, what happened after that? And so that blank gets filled in. And the stories become more and more elaborate over time. And I think that's what's, we're kind of, if you will, because this is a later period in time, we're kind of maybe seeing how myths arise more in real time here. Because we've got documentation, there's a better history of it. And these pseudo-epigraphical scriptures could be seen as the way we, beginning with the basic texts, which we can't change. We're no longer in an oral history. We've got the written history all kind of set. But now in this new context to flesh out the story of Mary, we really do what had been done in the past in the oral tradition, and we say that if she's the mother of God, then what must be true about her past? And it's recorded in that question is raised, and the answer is recorded in a different way from the way it was in the oral period. But maybe the way in which this doctrine arose, this theology, this understanding arose, is really very similar to the way the myths arose, and could be understood in a very similar way.
Thank you, Brian.
I
If any,
would say, for example, I don't want to go on and on about this.
no,
but
please go.
in the Gospel of John, the first 7 chapters are considered by some scholars, maybe most, to be a collection of stories, the 7 seals of Jesus. These are that were, first maybe orally, and then after a while were written. They were collected and set forth in these first 7 chapters of John, but weren't written by the author of John. They were compiled by the author of John. These are considered 7 episodes that provide evidence of the fact that Jesus was the Son of Man. And so we're seeing, because we're in the written tradition now instead of the oral, we see the way in which these stories, we can capture the way in which these stories evolve in a way that was not available in the oral and the mythical period.
That is fascinating. I did not know about the first 7 chapters being the 7 seals. I did not know that, and that's just so interesting. I love what you bring to this meetup, Brian. Just, if I don't say it at the end, I'm saying it now, because that was just great. If anybody else has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Okay, seeing no questions or comments, I'm going to move on. So I'm going to attempt to pronounce this. Pro-Evangelium of James. It's attributed to Jesus's brother. And this is where we learn who Mary's parents are. Interesting to note that Mary's parents are not mentioned in the New Testament. So Mary's parents are Joachim and Anna. They were rich and pious, but childless. Similar to Mary, and Anna receives an angelic revelation that she has conceived a child. And the parents vow to commit the child to a life of service. And Mary is dedicated as a perpetual virgin. And it is also noted in that in the Pro-Evangelium of James that Mary's body could not be corroded. Now, there has been debate about just really this point here about Mary. Was she a virgin? Was she not a virgin after Jesus was born? There is no dispute that she was a virgin before Jesus was born, But the question is after, because even in the New Testament, it talks about Jesus's brothers and sisters. And so that implies that Mary did conceive the natural way after Jesus's birth. But some traditions wanted to keep her as a virgin, and we're going to go through that more. But I just thought it was interesting here that she is dedicated as a perpetual virgin. And I also thought it was interesting too that, and this is something I didn't know until I studied this, is that similar to Mary, Anna received an angelic revelation that she had conceived a child. So it kind of goes to the story that this was all in line to bring about the birth of Jesus, and this was all planned. So just interesting to note. And then we're going to go into the virgin birth. In the New Testament, they in the infancy narratives, in Luke 1:26-38, Mary is an active agent in the story in that she has to accept, that she's going to give birth to the Christ, and she has to, and she says yes. So by doing that, she accepts everything that she probably knows is going to come with it, the rumors, you know, um, the looks, everything that is going to come with it, and also the responsibility of raising up a child, which is pressure enough. But if you add that you're raising the child of God, it just brings that pressure to a whole new level. So Mary had to accept all that, and she did, and she became the mother of God. Um, and like I said before, there's a question of, did Mary remain a virgin after birth? We talked about that. Um, and some people, it was some note that some people wanted to keep Mary a virgin because it was considered to be the purest state. And so they wanted to just keep, keep the mother of God, pure. And you can see that as understandable. Um, and you can understand why they did it. So part of the reason why certain traditions wanted to keep her this way is uh, going into the Hellenistic period. So in the Hellenistic period, when the early church was coming up and just forming, female sexuality was identified with the body and feared. Um, we can see that throughout, traditional church now, um, that female sexuality is kind of something that's supposed to only be for your husband. It's only supposed to be in the bedroom. Even married women had to present themselves as pure and only for their husband. Um, the Christian church, of course, adopted this view. And the reason why they adopted this view, according to Isabella Price, is that the Christian church feared that reason would be overthrown by passion. So the passion would take over. Of course, you'll be seduced and you will be led into sin. So you had to keep that in check. Spiritual fulfillment was sought by detaching from earthly concern and bodily pleasures. So, you can definitely see it in the Bible, but you can also see it in Christian traditions, is that the world and the spirit are separate, right? This earth is, impure, and, you're going to go to heaven where you're going to be pure, you're going to be with God, and you're going to be separated. Um, spirit and earth are two separate things. Um, you'll see in other traditions that that's not the case, that this the earth and the spirit can connect, and you can connect with nature. Certain religious traditions or spiritual practices have spirituality connected to nature. Christianity really doesn't do that. One interesting thing of note that I thought was interesting was that Mary was perceived as the new Eve. A pure womb overcomes the sin of the first Eve. Just like Jesus being the new Adam, the old Adam was sinful and, obviously fell, and sin with Eve, Mary being a new Eve, kind of purifying that. I thought it was just an interesting concept. So before we go into this next session, is there any questions or comments? If you do, you can type exclamation point in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Penny or Brian, I saw both of you lean in.
Oh, okay. Well, I've got something. I don't know if Penny does. I liked you. I really liked your last slide. I just wanted to point out that yes, this all happened during the Hellenistic period, but a lot of the facts, the attitudes you spelled out were unique to Christianity or the sources that Christianity drew upon. This was not a common understanding throughout with all people, all religions, all wisdom traditions during the Hellenistic period. You have the Zoroastrian, probably the Jewish and the Christian, but then that are more in line with this, but then you have others that are not. And I think you're going to get into that now. I think another way to put it, I haven't seen your list yet, but it's these other traditions also persisted during the Hellenistic period.
Thank you, Brian. Penny, did you have anything to add? I saw you lean in, so I just wanted to make sure.
I just wasn't sure if you were going to say anything additionally about the difference in the view of the word virgin in earlier societies, that they viewed the goddesses as virgin, but that was more that they were true to themselves, to their intrinsic nature, that they were able to act just on their own, not having to rely on other people in their actions, and that they were independent and free to, take lovers and things like that. Whereas the Christian viewpoint of the virgin is basically, a woman who hasn't been with a man is a virgin, but that doesn't imply anything about her being independent or autonomous or being able to act under her own intrinsic nature, like a lot of the other goddesses, because they were called virgins, but not because they hadn't been with men, but because they had these other characteristics.
Yeah, I am going to cover it, but that was a good way of putting it. So thank you. Yeah, and it is true that it is more of a powerful attribute that is attributed to goddesses, that the term virgin. But you're right, it is more of an autonomy and a choice rather than an obligation. And it's important to note that within within goddesses, when they originate, it's their choice. And if they choose to be with someone, then it's their choice as well. And they're not judged for it. And they're not made any less because they choose a lover. Whereas in Christianity, if you choose a lover that is not your husband, oh, you're scorned and in some cases stoned. We saw that in the New Testament with the woman, and Jesus had to save her basically and say to the people, he who has not sinned cast the first stone. And so you can see that women could be killed for choosing a lover outside of their husband. So it definitely, you're right, it is such a stark contrast. Up next, I have Olga. Oh, wait, I think I have to allow you to unmute.
Okay, hi. Long ago, I talked to a person who tried to translate Bible like literally. And he was saying that it was extremely difficult because the meaning of the words changed during times, and not only for like 6 or 4 or 2000 years. By just during this time, it's changed. And what I heard actually that at some time, at some point in the past, virgin birth was meant only that woman has a first child. That's it. It was then, probably it was reinterpreted for many reasons, but actually at some point in time, it was meant only that.
Olga, can I ask a question? When you say that you were talking about women in firstborn,
Firstborn child, no, virgin birth consider was when they say, when people said virgin birth, it meant only that woman has first child. That's it. It was not meant anything else.
okay, thank you so much for that.
It was, it's, I definitely not could not say that I'm absolutely sure. I just was sad about it.
Oh, I understand. Thank you for so much for sharing that and for
Thanks.
expanding on that a little more. If anyone else has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next part of the presentation. So actually, we're going to the part that Penny was talking about. You know, the Virgin Goddess and pagan traditions. So, you know, the story of the Virgin Mary is kind of rooted in pagan traditions. You know, we're going to talk about the Virgin Goddesses. You know, Greco-Roman traditions, all, you know, all the goddesses were called virgins. And, you know, some of the notable ones was Athena, Artemis, Hera, Demeter, and Persephone. Why can't I pronounce words today? So all these women had, you know, they were all strong goddesses. They were all leaders. They were all, you know, they all had control over their own destiny in a sense. You know, they weren't weak. They weren't like, you know, follow your man. They had their own personality. And it was just very powerful. So they were all very powerful women in their own right. And so, like Penny was saying, being a virgin and, you know, in Greek tradition with Greek goddesses was something totally different. You know, you did have, again, you just had your ability to take on your own lover, and it was a choice for you. And it was a choice for you to take a lover or not take a lover. So it was that strength. And as you can see, right here, this last line. So with that, just going to move on. And also the point about gods impregnating mortal women. There are other examples where God, you know, impregnated mortal women. And, you know, the one that's talked about in the chapter is Dionysus. You know, the Greek god Dionysus was born of the mother Semele and father Zeus. And Semele was impregnated by a bolt of lightning. And, you know, so, and the book also talked about Buddha, but when I did a little research, I wasn't sure if that was correct, so I didn't use it, but I wanted to bring it up anyway because it is in the book. And, you know, there's a lot of traditions and Greek traditions where mortal women are impregnated by God. And we can see that even in the Old Testament, in a sense, you know, not maybe with gods, but with divine beings, angels that were having sex with human women and creating, you know, a race called Nephilim, which were the giants. So, you know, I just thought this was an interesting point. And then it's interesting that, you know, in a sense, Mary is impregnated by God. So bringing that back. And this is just my opinion about it. But I think, you know, linking the Old Testament to the New Testament, you know, God didn't see the giants in the Old Testament as great, you know. He didn't like it, so he stopped it in the Old Testament from angels coming down and, you know, communing with human women. In the New Testament, he does it the way, the quote unquote right way, and we see that as a, also as a correction. And I just thought it was interesting, also because you can see that Jesus is supposed to be the new Adam, and with the story about Mary being the new Eve, I just thought that was just a really interesting concept. And we're going to talk about Mary as God bearer. Um, Now, Mary was declared as God bearer at the Council of Ephesus in 431 CE. Ephesus, this is interesting because Ephesus was where the great temple dedicated to the Greek goddess Artemis stood until the cult of Artemis was prohibited by the Christian emperor Theodosius in 380 CE. So Mary was seen by people who um, who worshipped the Greek goddess Artemis as the replacement to the goddess Artemis. And I thought this was interesting because I'm sure, I mean, this is my opinion, you know, but I'm sure that this is probably where some of the attributes of Greek goddesses were attributed to Mary as well, because it was a way of them kind of secretly worshiping their own goddess, but using Mary. And so to have it be acceptable. I'm going to talk about it a little later, but you can see it in other traditions as well, where Christian people kind of took over or, you know, dominated the land, that people kind of hid their goddesses in the study in the Virgin Mary. And so you'll see that some of the other traditions about Mary include these other goddesses so that they would be safe. I just I just think that's so interesting. Does anybody have any questions or comments before I go into the assumption? Oh, go ahead, Brian.
So I do have a comment that occurred while you were presenting, especially about gods impregnating mortal women. The thing that strikes me about the story of Mary is somehow I'm going to say this, I don't know if it's really true, that she was impregnated in a way that is let's say morally acceptable in the Jewish tradition. You know, we covered a little bit the why are there no goddesses in the West, and we talked about Athens and Jerusalem, and in the Jewish tradition, it isn't all these things that you outlined about monogamy and all of that, and what it is to be a virgin. Those kind of arose out of that Jewish tradition, and it was very important. It seemed to be very important in the manner in which Mary was impregnated is consistent with the customs, you know, the acceptable customs in the Jewish people. It's not like Dionysus. Semele is a human woman, as I recall, and Zeus is a god. I don't know, maybe that encounter was also, you know, consistent with the Greek custom, but it sounded like there wasn't so much concern about the details, the circumstance of the impregnation in some of these other myths, and more the, you know, the character of the people involved and the character of the entity or the person, like Dionysus, the god or hero who arose out of that birth. So I just find there's a little different focus in, at least in Isabella Price's chapter, and I think it really was true in these councils that occurred that, first of all, in the Testament itself, which is mostly in Luke, and then secondly, in all these councils, there's an attempt to reconcile this the birth of Jesus with the character of Jesus as they understand it, and also with the morality, if you will, that was acceptable in the early Christian community. And I just don't see that in the other gods impregnating virgins.
Thank you, Brian. If anybody else has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Other than, I'm gonna give it another 30 seconds while I check on this person that's trying to enter.
Joe has something.
Oh, Joe,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly, I have not read this chapter in Isabella Price's book, I must admit. So, but is there anything about the Immaculate Conception?
That's actually coming up in the presentation.
Okay,
But it is it is actually coming up. Just to give you a little bit of a brief answer, some people accept the doctrine, some people don't.
sure.
The Immaculate Conception. Wait, I'll just wait till we get to the slide because I don't want to say something that's not in the presentation.
That's
But
fine.
all right, thank you, Joe. DLJ, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, so apologies because I'm going to disappear shortly, but I've enjoyed it so far and not disagreed with much. So well done. That's always disappointing if I can't disagree. Brian's comment on myth versus fact, I thought was very telling because, and he's sort of followed that up. I want to just agree there that these attempts to, I guess, square the circle, right, is because, and the various councils where they're saying, what are we going to do about this conflict in our beliefs, right? Is because you're right. It's taken as history, it's taken as fact, and not taken as myth, where we just kind of accept it as stories. And I think you're right. I mean, that sort of pulls it together, right? They probably wouldn't have to go through these council after council after council and say, what are we going to do about this bit? If Mary was pure, then surely she was born. Hang on, therefore we need the Immaculate Conception. So all of that is coming from. You're right. The idea that this started as fact and not as myth. So I think you nailed it there. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you. Joe.
Yeah, I like what, actually, just building off what DLJ just said, it's an iterative process that you kind of see the development of actually the story itself and kind of trying to make it a whole. So, it's kind of trying to make it non-contradictory. So you kind of see the philosophy aspect of it starting to build into with these different councils being built into the religion itself, so that rational arguments can be made, so that they can be presented as facts.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, DLJ. DLJ, I know you have to go, but I wanted to thank you for being here and for participating. I'm not going to take it personal that you're leaving us for another group. But seriously, thank you for being here. Oh, Brian has something to say.
You have another kind of from another perspective, not the virgin birth, and I guess we're gonna get into that. Maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but just throw out the idea and we can come back to it. The one hand, there's a lot, and the Immaculate Conception maybe will address this, but there's a lot of focus on the context in which the birth arose in the Mary and Jesus story. But then there's another element to it, and that is that if you compare it to some of the Sumerian and Akkadian and other Mesopotamian myths and traditions, really what happened on the ground, and also in Canaan, the you had priestesses who were having sex in the temples, and it wasn't just the heroes gamos once a year with the king. It was just more, depending on the time and place, a more or less common practice. And the outcome of that was that a lot of children were born to mothers. Today we'd say that they were, single mothers or fatherless children, but nobody knew who the father was. And that's I don't know, I see a little bit of a parallel there with the whole concept of virgin birth, that you don't know who the father is. And just the father is not an individual human being. And just another point on that, the kind of a footnote, it's important for Jesus to be the Messiah. It's important that he come from the house of David in the Jewish tradition. And there's no evidence in the New Testament, or I think anywhere in these councils, that Mary comes from the house of David. There is, however, the genealogy of Joseph, the human father. They give it, I think it's in Luke, a detailed genealogy that he comes from the house of David. So the father who's not involved in the conception is the link to the house of David, and not the mother who was involved. And that's, maybe we can talk more about that, but that's kind of an interesting point too.
You're right, that is an interesting point. And I always wondered about that myself, because like you said, Joseph was not the biological father of Jesus, but he, in a sense, was named as the human father of Jesus. When Jesus was coming up, Joseph was Jesus's father, human father, and his line came from David. It's just, you're right, it is a very interesting concept. Maybe something to look into. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? If not, the next part of the presentation we're going to go into is the Assumption of Mary. So in 1950, the doctrine of the Assumption, officially proclaimed by Pope Pius XIII, the Assumption is the doctrine that Mary was taken up body and soul into heaven. In the text known as Mary's Dormition, and actually the Assumption again is not in the New Testament. I just wanted to point that out. This text states that after the death of Jesus, Mary was visited by an angel. The angel assured her that she would be joined with her son. And when Mary died, her body was placed in the tomb. Jesus appeared in a cloud surrounded by angels, and her soul ascended into heaven. And I have to say, I only knew part of this story. I didn't know that Jesus came back and appeared when Mary died. Again, and Catholicism accepted this. I don't think Protestantism accepted it. So it was accepted by certain Christian traditions, and certain traditions did not. And again, I think it goes back to the Bible being presented as fact. So I guess in this story, if there was no proof, some religions just didn't accept it, and some religions did. So I just thought that was interesting. And then we're going to go into Mary as the Queen of Heaven. She was proclaimed Queen of Heaven by the church in 1954. She was associated with military interventions similar to an Anna and Athena. And I thought that was interesting that, probably some of, the people were weaving, when they were, I guess I don't want to say creating, because it sounds like it's false, but when they were talking about Mary being the Queen of Heaven, it's just ironic that, certain goddesses had that similar title. And I was just wondering again, if was this a case of some people weaving in their traditions into this concept of Mary. Um, you know, Anna was also known as the queen of practical knowledge, that male kind of energy, right? That, I agree with you, Brian. I don't even like the concept of calling it masculine and feminine, but that kind of like, for lack of better word, that male energy. She accumulated many spiritual realms on earth: political, family, military, agricultural, and arts and crafts. In this way, she was like the goddess of Isis and Oshun. So it's just kind of interesting that Mary was, kind of took on some of those concepts. It was themed that she had protective powers, which is one of the reasons why she was used in military interventions. Um, and this figure of Mary is associated with a crown of stars, similar to an Anna. You can see some of the imagery where she is. There's various images on Google about Mary, Queen of Heaven, and yes, it does have similarities to Greek goddesses. Again, I wonder if that was just integrated in. She's the patroness of ships and sailors, and um, fertility and childbirth, similar to other goddesses that we have studied. Ashun and Isis come to mind. So just thought that was just very interesting. And this is some of the what this is just one that I pulled up. And this image points out another an ancient Babylonian goddess. I can't pronounce that word. And she's the goddess who wore the crown and was also called the Queen of Heaven. So, just different traditions coming in again. Can everybody see that kind of?
Yeah.
So I just thought, and another interesting note is the mother and the child, you know, just just so similar. And there's so many of them. I just had this one just spoke to me because I just thought it was just so similar. Um, and it was just striking, the traditions being just woven into each other. And this is the last part of the presentation, and then we can go into questions and comments. This is the Black Virgin. This tradition came from several countries, or they're found in several countries, which is Spain, France, Poland, which I thought was interesting, Italy, Switzerland, and Germany. Pre-Christian goddesses were rededicated as the Black Virgin to allow people to continue their devotion to an archetypal image. Now I'm regretting not getting pictures of the Black Virgin, but you can see her in different forms. And I think they said Our Lady of Lourdes in France is one of them. Interesting to note that in the Vatican, there were several images of the Black Virgin that are in this vault that they don't let out. But there's several artworks to the Black Virgin, and the Black Virgin is an embodiment of all the elemental forces of nature. Um, and finally, and I thought this is a great point to end with, that the darkness of the Black Virgin is a symbolism of the beginning. And if you think about it, everything came from darkness, like even things that were created. If you go to the Genesis story, the earth and everything was created out of darkness. So that is the beginning, which I just thought was interesting. So and thank you all for listening, and I'm going to close out and stop sharing. So does anybody else have any questions and or comments about anything that I presented? Anything that you want to know more about? If so, you can type exclamation point in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Oh, Penny, go ahead.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that I had found it very interesting that, you know, there's been a long tradition of like worshiping Mary, and I think stories that were told about her, and, you know, if her virgin birth or the Immaculate Conception, the Assumption, and that the Catholic Church, like in 1950 and 1954, which was, you know, recent history, is declaring the truths of these beliefs that have been around, you know, for a couple thousand years. I just thought it was amazing that at this point in time, they felt the need and to declare these things, and like the certainty that, you know, after 2,000 years, they, you know, they decided, yeah, you know, this is really true now. We've examined it. I thought it was amazing that these issues are being debated in this way, basically right now. And they're giving their blessing to whether it's true or not.
Yeah, you know what, it's so funny. I didn't know the dates of the Assumption and the Immaculate Conception and all that were declared until I read the chapter, and I was like, that's just recent history. And I think it's ironic because on the one hand, you see the church warning people against paganism, right? And, you know, worshiping other gods and doing all these things, but yet they have accepted these traditions that are rooted in, you know, Greek mythology and rooted in paganism. I mean, obviously, I've always thought it was weird, like some of the things, like even the celebration of Christmas, winter solstice, you know, Festival of Lights, all those things are rooted in other traditions that they say are wrong. But it just, yeah, I agree. Like, you know, now you're saying it's true, and it's not a part of the you know, the Bible, the traditional Bible. They're accepting other works outside of the Bible. You know, like none of these concepts come from the New Testament, which is why Protestant religions don't believe in them, because they don't come from the Bible. So they're false religion. And yeah, I just think that's so interesting. Up next we have Joe.
Fantastic presentation. So
Thank you.
I really appreciated it. And one of the things that I actually had read, and this is many years ago in the Economist magazine of, you know, which is, I understand, not exactly a solid religious source. But that being said, it was a double issue, Christmas issue, I remember reading, and it talked about how Mary is also revered in Islam, in the Quran, and how there is a chapter about her in the Quran. Now, did Isabel Price mention anything along those lines? No.
No.
Okay. But yeah, that would be interesting, because on the cover that it was, and I'll find the article, but it said a Mary for all, and it talked about how Mary actually touches in each of the three major traditions. So anyway, I'll find
Yeah,
and post it for everybody, but it shouldn't be very difficult to find. But I remember that I had received this magazine, and I don't know, it had to be 2001 or something like that.
no, but it is interesting because, you know, the Quran does accept Jesus. So I can definitely see, if it accepts Jesus, then I could see them as accepting Mary, because Mary's the mother of Jesus. And yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Maybe something we should cover in future meetups. Thank you, Joe. Up next, I have Judy, followed by Connie.
Hi, Ebony. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I really appreciate the fact that you are bringing up such an incredible subject as goddesses and the Virgin Mary and everything else that is connected with it. So I'm really enjoying it. So I wanted to thank you, first of all. And the second thing is that I wanted to add what Joseph said about the Islam, but I wanted to add the brown virgin, which is in the Americas. She's venerated in the Americas. I can name two, which is the Guadalupe in Mexico and Caridad or Charity in Cuba and the Caribbean. And they're really venerated, and they have a lot of similarities with all the wonderful images that you have provided and the meanings that the Virgin Mary that you have provided. A lot of similarities as you were speaking. I was just thinking of them and relating them to these brown virgins. They're not black because they have the Indian combination, the Mexican, Central America, and South American Indian, which has brown skin. But she does definitely have a lot of the same similarities. One of them is being a protector. A lot of people, millions of people, venerate Guadalupe and venerate the Virgen de la Caridad del Cobre, or the Virgin of Charity of Copper. They call her Copper Virgin. So she's copper colored. And so I just wanted to add that, so my understanding of these two images, and there are more. There's the Pachamama in Peru, everywhere where there's Indians, Native American Indians. I don't know about North America. I have no idea, but there probably is. I don't know. So I'd like to explore that a little bit more, like the copper or brown colored type of virgin.
Thank you, Judy. I think that would be hugely interesting. Definitely we'll think about covering that. Maybe when we're done with the book, or maybe just in the future meetup in addition to the book. I wasn't aware until you said it of the brown virgin, and I just think that's so interesting and rich the way you were talking about it, and that protector. And I noticed like well, I shouldn't say all, but a lot of these portrayals of Mary are protective. And so I just think that's really interesting. And I know, in Catholicism, like you pray for intercession through the Virgin Mary, and you allow Mary to intercede for you. And so I guess in a sense it is kind of like a protective person. And it makes sense because mothers are protective. And if she's the mother, queen of heaven, and the mother of all, protective is within her nature. So thank you. Up next, I have Connie.
Well, by the time I raised my hand, by the time I put my thoughts together, someone else generally says what I'm going to say, and often I've noticed it's Penny. I think like she does, because it's like that's exactly. I'm kind of dumbstruck tonight, to be honest with you. And Ebony, as just you and Brian, this is wonderful. Just a wonderful presentation. I can barely comprehend that I've gone a lifetime and not known about this being considered a myth. And that whole conversation about myth was, I can almost hear it again because I'm trying to grasp it totally. I do know, so they didn't have to prove as much or verify it as much if it's considered a story. But so and then the link with Joseph versus Mary. I don't know. I'm just dumbstruck by how much I've learned tonight. And I'm going to really read this again. I didn't get any of this when I read it. And just thank you for I hope some more, I hope we continue because we've got some more time. I don't have anything to contribute or enough even to ask any question, but it just seems like there's, I don't know, I can't even, my brain can't even wrap around a lifetime, especially the Catholic Church and Mary and that not being in the Bible. I'm dumbstruck. So anyway, thank you.
You're welcome. I think I'm thankful that you appreciate the presentation. And yeah, it's a lot. And there's a lot of things that I didn't know either. So I'm in your camp until I read this. And, that's one of the reasons why Brian and I, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, that we both like doing this series and we both like studying because we learn as well by going through the material and really, looking up certain things and researching certain things. And I know for me, I do this just because I'm curious too. I don't claim to be an expert in any of this. So Connie, you and I are in the same boat. So, we're together. And like I said, there's a lot of things that I didn't know. And I didn't know that a lot of the stuff that I learned in Catholic school was not in the Bible itself. It was from other books. So yeah, we're in the same boat. And of course, we can discuss as long as we want. If you think of anything else, Connie, or if anybody thinks of anything, you can type exclamation point in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Or if you don't really want to talk on camera, you can also type your question in the comment section if you want to. Up next, I have Joe.
Yeah, one of the things actually in Catholicism, they always said, if you're going to pray to Mary, because the quickest way to the heart of Jesus is through his mother, right? And that comes back to the idea that you would, he couldn't say no to his mother, and whether it be the miracle where he turns water into wine or something along those lines. And so it's definitely something where, and they have obviously the rosary and things along those lines that they do hold her in the highest of regards. But another interesting fact here is, okay, so I pulled up that article and they talked about actually how Mary links to Judaism as well. It says, much of the poetry dedicated to Mary comes from what is called the wisdom tradition of the Jewish religion. This takes the form of passages in which wisdom is perceived in the form of the feminine divinity. And it says one of the most explicit references to wisdom as a sort of a female agency or power is in the book of Proverbs. Wisdom hath builded her house. She hath killed her breasts. She hath mingled her wine and furnished her table. So anyway, it seems like this one particular article actually links part of it to the Jewish religion, the Islam religion, and as well as the obviously Christian religion. But anyway, just thought that was an interesting ad.
Thank you, Joe. It is an interesting ad. And yeah, I mean, I was thinking of, I have a question for you actually. So, and in that article, is it saying that like Mary is the equivalent of wisdom in the Proverbs? Like, is she kind of like a manifestation, or is it just is it a similarity?
I can't answer that question without having it. I read this in 2003, literally. So that's when the article actually came out, and I'm looking at it now. So I believe there is something along that. But I can take a quick look and see if I can answer that question.
Yeah, if not, don't worry about it. I was just curious. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Judy and then Brian.
Just a quick question. It's not really a question, it's a comment. I was raised with the prayer of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. They always included Joseph. Joseph was never left out of the group. And he was he was even more of a protector because he protected the Virgin Mary, which was her, which was carrying the child of Jesus while she was still pregnant. And he protected her from the society. This is what I always heard, that society wanted to, at that time they would like throw rocks and things to women that became pregnant that didn't have any spouse. And so that he was like the hero of the picture, because that's what I was raised, and I was raised in Latin America, where so it wasn't like really Catholic, but it wasn't really Christian either. It was kind of like a mixture of kind of like esoteric native types of beliefs. And Joseph was really important, but it was always Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. I just wanted to add that, that he was really important.
What's so funny? I was taught that too.
Uh-huh.
And the reason why I think it was saying because Joseph was protecting, by marrying Mary, he was protecting her from the scorn, and the simple fact that he had to have faith to accept that she was pregnant by God, and that an angel had to appear to him and let him know, go through with the marriage, because he was just going to quietly not go through with it, not to embarrass her, but he kind of thought the same thing everybody else thought, that she just got pregnant, right? And the angel was like, no, this is the child of God. But like, if you think about it, Joseph is kind of a hero, because if you think about it, there were rumors, people probably counted, they probably I'm sure there were rumors about it, and but he just took that on and he protected her, and I'm sure he marriages were arranged anyway, so
Mhm, mhm.
but for him to take that on, and for him to sit there and wonder and just be like, I think I'm just going to divorce you quietly, kind of thing, or I'm not going to just marry you or something. Yeah, so I could see that.
And
Okay.
supposedly they had other children after Jesus.
In the New Testament, it says Jesus had brothers and sisters. So
Mhm.
did she remain a virgin? Did she not remain a virgin? I don't know. But
Well,
the one
yeah.
thing that's really not disputed is that she was a virgin before, when she got pregnant with Jesus, which is why she's given the title the Virgin Mary.
Yeah. Well, the big question is Saint Gabriel. What role did he have with her conceiving?
Yeah,
To me, that's the big question.
I never heard that's a very
Well,
interesting
well,
question.
didn't you see that movie and what's her name? Jane Fonda was a journalist, and she goes to investigate this nun that has been impregnated by God, by an angel. There's a movie, I can't remember the name, and they kind of take the same story but put it in modern terms. It's a really good story also about that the nun really believes that the angel impregnated her, but she's a journalist, so she doesn't believe that. So anyway, so it's a really good movie. But I thought about that story then, when Saint Gabriel appeared to Mary. How did that happen? I mean, we don't really hear that much about it. Only that he appeared, Saint Gabriel appeared, and then he told her that she was going to be a mother, and then we don't hear that much about him after that.
Yeah, that's totally true. I think, Joe, did you just put the movie in the description in the chat? Is that the movie?
No,
Oh, okay. I was just reading, and I know you had put something in the chat, but I was like, is that the movie? I thought you knew it.
I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
the
I'll try to
passage that I
remember.
read, and then something about how it came from the wisdom tradition, And so, and how that's related to Jewish scripture, and how how some of the language from the wisdom tradition and Jewish scripture got transferred into, translated into Christianity and the Holy Spirit. So.
Okay. Thank you for that. And sorry I mistook it for the movie. So up next, Brian, if you don't mind, I'm going to have Olga go first because she hasn't talked in a while.
Yeah.
And then Brian.
Okay. Hi again. It's I already talked about that. What I know that it's in many cases texts that translated from some ancient language was misinterpreted, and their traditions and relationships in the family were different. For example, in my country, cousins are called second born sister and third born sister or fourth born sister. So they still sisters and brothers, called sisters and brothers. It's like I try to give literal translation. So what is going on there in the Bible? Probably these sisters and brothers are actually cousins. And it's not, don't even have any relation to Mary. Maybe they have only to Joseph. And so, so it's, again, we don't know exact relations and how they were called. And my point is that it's with Christmas. It's almost definite if you really read Bible, he was born in the spring because there was, it's in the field, there was, wait, I'm not sure, I forgot the word, how these people who cares for sheep, they were in the field to help sheep with bird also. It was said. So it's usually, not usually, it's always happened in spring. So Christmas probably was in spring, but church is later reinterpreted for many different reasons. So it's about virgin birth, it's about brothers and sisters and everything. So there is still questions, and I'm not sure that it could be, and if it's even important to answer them. Because for religious people, it's not what this is important, most important. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Olga. I think you brought up a really interesting point about cousins being referred to as brothers and sisters. And one of the things I was thinking of is, like, you know, sometimes if something happens to the parents, for instance, you know, if something happens to brothers or sisters, and you know, or to the parents, and their brothers and sisters wind up raising their children for whatever reason, they're raised as brothers and sisters, but they could be cousins, and that could be the case too. So that's a very interesting point that I never really thought about. That maybe they could have been brothers and sisters, but it could also been maybe they were just raised up with Jesus, and they were all raised together, and they were like brothers and sisters. That's a really interesting point.
Could I add something else about Joseph?
Yeah.
It's he could already, nobody knows. Maybe he had some kind of again, not maybe not children, but maybe children from previous marriage or something like this. We don't know at all. And there was possible to have several wives at this time. And also he could, you see, there was in Jewish law, for example, if your brother dies, you have to marry his wife to give continuous to their line. It's in Jewish law. So he probably, I don't know, but probably if he like heard that she is having a God's child or something like this, he probably thought that he should do something like this, marry her. And also, you see, in this time, it was also common when people intermarried with relatives. So probably why they did not say anything about Mary's line, because she's just a woman. It's not important. You see, she anyway related to Joseph. So she's also from this line, something like this. We have absolutely different psychology, and especially we think about women as people. At this time, it's not so much. You see, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Can we judge everything from our point of view? With our psychology, with our experience, you see. So I'm not sure. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. I think you're right. Like, we are seeing it from our eyes and just reading it from our eyes and our perspective, and to give it maybe a little more historical perspective. So I think all the points you made were great, and it's just another great way to look at it. So thank you. Up next, I have Brian.
Yeah, I really appreciate the comments, especially from Olga and Jody and Connie. Julie and Connie. That really has added a lot for me tonight. The one thing that I would say, I'd like to say, is that we've drawn, we've drawn connections between this, maybe two things, between this Christian tradition and other traditions. And to me, it doesn't really take away from the power of the story of Mary, that it's similar to, and may have even come from, other traditions, or certain elements of her story may have come from other traditions. To me, that just adds strength to it, in that these are necessary elements or dimensions of life that she embodies or captures. And we can't, if we try to ignore it, it just keeps coming back. And that leads me to the second point, that I think maybe the early church did not venerate the feminine, the divine feminine, in the way that's captured now in Mother Mary and her veneration. And it just, to me, again, and again, this is the reference to the copper and all the other images of Mother Mary throughout the world, that we really can't live without the divine feminine. We just need it to be whole.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, so many people added so many things to think about tonight. And so tonight just has been really interesting and really beautiful. And I love what people have brought to this meetup. Penny, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just, I was looking again at the book. Based on what Julie had said about, the Virgen de Guadalupe. And they did give some information here about that. And they're saying that basically, as she had indicated, that basically it was a mixture of the Virgin Mary of the Catholic Church, but also then of this pre-Columbian earth goddess, Tonantzin. And the site of the Basilica of Guadalupe, the Virgen de Guadalupe, they actually had, there was a shrine to the earth goddess, Tonantzin, on that site before. And they knocked that site down and, built the church. And that they say that, she said that even today, some of the Mexican Indian tribes still refer to her by, the Tonantzin name. And that 10 years after the Spanish conquest, the Virgin Mary appeared in that site. And that the Indians then thought that she was basically their goddess who had come to life. And so she had assumed the role of their goddess. And they started worshiping her, the Virgin Mary, as basically a new embodiment of their goddess. So that's a lot what she had said, that, how there was a combination of the native beliefs and the Catholic beliefs, and the embodiment of some of the characteristics they thought that the goddess, the earth goddess, has, and they gave them to the Virgin Mary.
Thank you, Penny. That is yeah, that is great. And she went into that in the chapter, right? Like Isabella Price did go into that. Yeah, now that you said it, I do remember reading it. I don't know why I didn't put it in the presentation itself. Probably should have. So thank you, Judy, for bringing that up, and thank you, Penny, for pointing that out, because it's just so interesting. Up next, I have Brian, did you want to say something else? I'm sorry.
No, I'm looking forward to what Judy has.
Judy,
Well,
you're
the thing is that there's hundreds of brown virgins. There's hundreds. They have them all over the place in Latin America, South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, and in Mexico, which is considered North America. But there's hundreds, and people venerate them. Now, the church, to get the acceptance of the natives, changed the whole scene to that native woman to become the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus. So they always place a little child next to her, and they kind of syncretize the traditional native beliefs to the new Christian Catholic beliefs that were coming in with the colonial people in the 1500s. So that's when things started to change in the 1500s, when the colonies were when the colonies came to America with the Spaniards. It all happened with the Spaniards. But the other thing that I wanted to mention was, I don't know where I read this, but I read that virgin really means that you're an independent woman, that you don't need a man to be in the world. That doesn't necessarily mean that because you're a Virgin Mary that you are not that you didn't use sex to procreate. So it means that you're an independent woman, and that you can do your thing, and that you can go along, throughout your lifetime without necessarily having the protection of a husband, unless you decide that you want to have a husband to protect you. But that it really is something like more of a feminist thing. That I don't know where I read that, but it kind of stuck to me.
thank you,
That's all.
Judy. No, that
You
was
read all
really,
these, you read all these things, you never know what to believe, you know?
you know what, I think it's good to read like everything so then you can make up your own mind. But I love what you said because I did never heard that interpretation of virgin before, but I like it. And I think again, it kind of goes to what Penny was saying earlier, you know, with the goddesses is that they had the choice to choose. Um, it wasn't like this purity thing, it was an independent feminist. I can go this alone. I could do this alone. And if I want to take a partner, I can take a partner. And I think that's so empowering because if you think about it, you know, you don't have to put up with things that you don't want to. You can, the power for women to be able to choose who they be with is just great. And to choose to not be with someone, if that's your choice, you know, it's not a bad thing to not want to be married. It's not a bad thing. And it's not a bad thing to want it. So it really is about choice. So I love that. Does anybody else have any questions and or comments before we wrap up?
Who will you be doing next month?
We haven't chosen yet,
Okay.
but we'll let you know soon.
Thank you very much to everyone, and Evanique especially. Thank you so much for putting this together.
You're welcome, Brian. And thank you for your input and comments because they were really just fascinating. And, you know, so thank you as well. And thank you, Penny. Of course, you know, again, your thoughts, I mean, your comments were amazing. And thank you both for partnering with me throughout this series. So I love working with you guys and look forward to choosing the topic next month. Does anybody have anything that they want to hear about, or you know, I don't think of it as just like Brian, Penny, and my meetup. You know, we partner with the research and doing, you know, and doing the presentations. But does anybody here want to hear about anything or learn about something that you just want to suggest as a topic? Not putting anyone on the spot. If you can't think of anything now, that's fine. But if you think of something, you can message me or Brian or Penny in the meetup group. You could just send us a private message if you think of anything, or if you want to say something now, feel free. Okay,
You want to do some upcoming events?
sure.
I think Judy had something.
Judy?
No, I did it. I just wanted to say that I'm very invested in this group, and I just want whatever you decide to do is fine with me. I'll try to participate as best as I can. Sometimes I don't participate because I don't know anything. I just listen to you guys, and I really admire the fact that you're doing all this research and putting it together and educating us, educating me. But whenever I have to contribute a little bit that I've heard here and there, I love to do that. So it's a two-way street. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy, for your words, and thank you for your participation tonight. Joe, did you want me to talk?
Yeah, do you want to go ahead and talk about upcoming events?
Sure, let me just pull it up.
Or I could look them up really quickly.
So I know Saturday is the Asian philosophy meetup at 7 p.m. and I think Jason's still the one leading that, right?
That's correct. It's the Confucian School of the Universal Principle. So that is tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. And then on Sunday, we'll be covering a very special meetup. Operating manual for Spaceship Earth, discussion about Buckminster Fuller as part of the comprehensivist series that we will be doing for the upcoming year. It's actually a very good introduction into comprehensivism. Talks about Buckminster, some of his very more challenging theories, but it also lays out in a very practical way what it means to be a comprehensivist, why specialization is dominating our educational system, and just his theories on automation and wealth and economics in general. So it's a very good meetup to just familiarize yourself with some of what Buckminster Fuller had said, had written. It was C.J. Fernley's one of his favorite books. And for anyone that has not heard, as you know, CJ passed away last night, and yeah,
Yeah.
after so
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Do you want me to
all.
do the rest of the meetup, the list of
Yeah,
meetups?
go
Okay.
ahead.
So first of all, you know, I'm so sorry about CJ passing. I'm sure he'll be mentioned Sunday night. Um, you know, it is a great loss. Not only to people that knew him personally, I was able to participate in some of his meetups, but to the 52 Living Ideas community, as well as the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. I do believe he was the one that founded it. So it is a great loss. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Some of the other meetups that are coming up, Monday is Poetry Mondays with Maritza. You know, where poems are read, and then there's a collaborative piece to it, where people think about certain verses to the poem, and then collectively the group creates a poem, and so that's great. Tuesday is Confucius, that's being led by Jason and Aman, as well. Wednesday is a comprehensivist Wednesday. I don't think a topic has been selected for that yet. And then Thursday we have Gospel of John with Gary. So he'll be leading that, and we're concentrating on chapter 14 right now. And on Friday, next Friday, will be the Design Your Life series, which I will be leading, and I will be doing a couple chapters from the book, The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. It's a very short book, but you don't have to read it at all. We're just going to talk about, when he talks about the compound effect, he uses the example of compounding interest. How if you use compounding interest, your money grows, but this is not finance because that ain't my field. But he talks about it in terms of actions, and in terms of how people build their lives using the compound effect. And the most notable one is the person that kind of does the little things and creates a great weight loss by the end of the year. So it's kind of like a more practical note. It'll just, it's about kind of taking the things that we learn in 52 Living Ideas, and it's a plan to put it into action. So it'll be a very interesting meetup. So does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Just thank you again.
You're welcome. Judy.
One quick question. Where can I send you information on this Copper Virgin? I have a book that I'd like to recommend.
Oh,
Where can
sure.
I send it to? Can you give me can you just put in the chat your email, or I can send it to you there?
Yeah, I'll do that right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a real good book.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
All right,
What was the name of it, Judy?
I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's called La Virgen de la Caridad del Cobre in Spanish.
Okay.
The Virgin of the Copper Virgin, the Virgen de la Caridad del Cobre, the Virgin of the Copper Virgin of Charity would be a loose translation in English, but it has beautiful photos and it's in Spanish, of course, but it has so many photos and it has a link to the Virgen de la Caridad del Cobre to ISIS, which is interesting. So I thought that that was really interesting when I read the book, and I used it to understand a little bit more about the it's a little statue that everybody has. Everybody that has come from Cuba or the Caribbean has that little statue with them of the Virgen de la Caridad del Cobre. Like everybody in Mexico has some statue of the Guadalupe Virgin. You know, they're really, really famous and popular and up there with the best of the best of the best protectors. You know, so. But this book is a really good book, and even though it's in Spanish, you can get something out. I'm going to find out if there is a translation. Maybe there's a translation.
Thank you, Judy. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, okay. I'll send it to you.
Thank you so much. And Brian, I'll send it to you once Judy sends it to me.
Thank you, and I'll give it to Penny. She knows Spanish.
Hopefully Judy can find an English version for my sake. If not, Penny, we have a lot of Zoom meetings coming up. If anybody else doesn't have anything else to say, I just wanted to thank you everyone for your participation tonight. I always love hearing different ideas, and you know, I always say you had a choice where to spend your Friday nights, and you chose to spend them with us. So I'm very privileged, and thank you so much. I've learned so much and gained so much from all of you being here. So with that, everyone have a great weekend.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.